I'm Glenn Muschert. I'm professor of digital sociology at Khalifa University in Abu Dhabi and appointed in the Department of Public Health and Epidemiology. Firstly, I'd like to thank the organizers of the Wahab for his kind invitation and the Kuwait Institute for Criminal Research and Analysis. And of course, thank you to the people and leadership of the country of Kuwait for inviting me. This is my first time to visit. I have received a very warm welcome. I thank you very much. So my talk today is about digital divides, social harm, and public safety in a hyper-connected world. And I focus mostly on youth. So at Khalifa University, it's a science, technology, engineering university, and I am a sociologist. I have a very consistent and a small nudging role, which is I have so many colleagues who work in technical fields and in engineering, and that I always ask what happens when people interface with these technologies. And so I have two speakers who preceded me who are speaking about things such as AI and the financial system, all very technical. However, I also would like to just give my thoughts about what happens when youth in particular. So I apologize, my talk is a little bit less sort of like referenced and such. If later on I can provide the references and things. However, I'm focusing mostly on big picture ideas at this point. So today's youth live in a complex digital ecosystem. Today's youth live in a complex digital ecosystem, and this is something that is not going to change. I am potentially in one of the developed countries. I grew up in the United States, the last generation to grow up without computing being everywhere. So the computers in my childhood was like the government had computers, right? We did not have any computers, and we had actually at that time a debate about whether or not our teachers allowed us to use calculators during our maths classes. And then we came to more personal computing, more network computing, the internet, social media, Web 2.0, and now we have this AI revolution. Now, the cat is out of the bag. This is an American term we use to mean like you can't go back, right? So if you have a cat, it comes out of the bag, try putting that cat back in there. It's just not going to be possible to put that cat back in the bag. And this is the way the life is going to be. So we've looked at those people who are entering the digital sphere as being like ourselves, as being digital immigrants. Right? So having grown up without the digital technologies mostly, I am a digital immigrant. I now live in this world where we have a lot of digital technologies around and I have to use them. And sometimes I probably don't have the skills and the preparation to use it. So for example, I had to have a pass to get into the VIP area, and I was messaging on WhatsApp, how do I get this thing? Where does it go? And things, right? And so it occurred to me during the previous talk that I just hit OK, yes, put it in my wallet, but I don't know what else is in my wallet. And this is a potential problem, is a sort of like, yes, I mean, to facilitate me entering into a physical space, I had to enter into a digital space. And oftentimes it's like, click this box to indicate that you've read all these policies, which we know we don't really read. So anyway, we live in this stuff with these added layers of complexity. And these digital platforms increasingly shape our identities. So for example, how many likes do I have? What is my profile? While my previous colleagues were giving their talks, I'm looking them up on LinkedIn to see their profiles and those kinds of things. In fact, I just sent the invites, please connect. And so this is an example of how the digital world works as well. And it also is part of so many spheres, right? So it's not just the entertainment, it's also that we're looking at things like how do I find education? How do I find financial information? How do I do business? How do I get health information? How do I access services, say from social services, and so on. And so the youth find themselves increasingly in a digital sphere. And I would say that while I feel that I am a digital immigrant, many youth are digital natives, is what we call them, that they were born in the digital sphere, or that it was always there as a part of life. And I think that the data studies looking at future is that no longer will there be a distinction between like on online and real life, right? Online, offline, but that the youth these days often see the digital as just part of the world, part of the living in the world, right? So how would you communicate with your friends? Then there's these different options. I can walk over to my friend's house, I can use a telephone, I can send a message on WhatsApp, or any number of things, right? I can meet my friends in a digital world where we play games together and all those. And I don't think that I'm a digital immigrant, and I will continue to think of myself as a digital immigrant. The generations behind me will think of themselves maybe as digital natives. However, I think it will just be part of life in the future, right? And so we have many opportunities that are presented, but there are also many risks, as we know. So there's rising concerns around mental health, safety, and well-being. And so digital well-being is kind of a new concept. It's just about how people are living a good life, beyond looking at public health in terms of the reduction of disease and injuries and infirmity. We look at people having positive living, right? So positive functioning, positive psychological states and such. And with the integration of the digital into these areas, digital well-being is an important growing field. Okay, so the core question is, how does the digital society shape the following related to youth well-being and resilience? The second is, what is the exposure that youth have to risk and harm due to the digital sphere? And finally, we need to look at the youth's capacity to make healthy choices in terms of the digital behaviors and their use of digital technologies. So here's where digital skills come in. Earlier studies of what we called the digital divide focused on two areas. The first was like, do people have connectivity? It was kind of a binary, yes, some people are connected and some people are not. That digital divide is still relevant in some countries, in some places, rural countries, in developing countries generally, where people don't have the connectivity. However, in a place like Kuwait or other GCC countries, there's near 100% connectivity. Is that almost every person has at least one mobile phone, but probably many of you here have more than one mobile phone and more than one points of connectivity. I have a 2 SIM card mobile phone right here. I have 2 numbers, and I have a third one that is with my wife right now, but there's another SIM card. And so, this idea of like kind of digital connectivity is kind of solved in a place like Kuwait and other GCC countries, right? But what it differs is that the level of digital skills. So the old time people said, yeah, we need to build the infrastructure, get people connected. However, in the last 10, 20 years, what we have been studying is people's skills as a foundation for successful digital living and success, right? And well-being in the digital sphere. So things such as technical competence and problem solving is important. The critical evaluation of information becomes increasingly important. When we were went to the library, if it was published in the books in the library, it was reliable. Then came the internet, where anyone can post anything about anything, and maybe it's true or not true. More recently, someone might say, I saw the leader of a corporation or the leader of a country or the religious leader say the following things in a video. Well, you find out that this is a deep fake, right? And so the idea of having to be able, how you can critically evaluate the information, who's saying what, and how it shows up is increasingly relevant. Privacy awareness and online safety is important. The kind of what information is out there, does a person put out there, and also how does a person protect themselves from these kinds of threats, hackers and scams, phishing and financial crimes as well would be in there. We need to also talk about emotional regulation in digital spaces, that when a person uses the digital, then how do we know like how to manage our emotions in relationship to the types of communication and behavior that's occurring in that digital space? When I was a school kid, when we went home, something embarrassing happened. Every person has something embarrassing happened at school or something, right? And then all of the children are talking about it, and maybe on the bus people are talking about it, and then you go home and it ends. You get up the next day, then you get back on the bus, and maybe somebody mentions it, maybe somebody doesn't, but something else is happening, and this is sort of how we dealt with things. Nowadays, if something embarrassing happens, then people are messaging about it. They're talking about it on the bus. As they go home in the evening, they're messaging. And then you go to sleep even. And while you're sleeping, people are still messaging about this. So when you wake up in the next morning, you open up and you see this entire series of things where people were saying, oh, this embarrassing thing happened. And there is less the ability to kind of disconnect from something that happened and then to kind of reset for the social, because it actually accelerates overnight, right? Also, it's important to understand things such as social and communication skills online. I have a department chair that I work under. He's really great. And one of the things that he always says is that in any work situation, someone sends an email, then someone doesn't like it, then they post something back, and then you can see it happen where the emails start to go like this one, you know, and then my boss, my department chair, will always say, everyone stop, stop, come to my office and we'll talk about this. Right? Because it's so difficult to communicate in many of the digital places and using these technologies. And so social communication, in this case, I'm using direct communication as being important, is important, and understanding the limits of what we can communicate in those digital spheres and the miscommunications that can occur is important. And then finally, how do we engage in responsible digital citizenship? And so citizenship, we oftentimes mean as a member of our nation, but we also mean, I here in this case mean like as a representative of university where I work, or as a student in a school, or as a member of a certain community. How do you behave in a responsible way in the digital sphere? Okay, so these are all some skills that I believe are fundamental for success. Yeah, so there's two possible pathways, and I think we're going to move down both pathways at the same time. It's a matter of which one do we move down more strongly. But there's two pathways for youth. One is towards success, and one is towards increasing vulnerability. On the one side, we have success, which is the digital sphere, and the availability of information leads to the access to knowledge and more opportunities. We definitely want this. However, the vulnerability is exposure to misinformation and manipulation. Okay, so it's kind of a both and. The success, the second one is about creativity, learning, and global connection. These are things that we want our youth to have available to them. However, the vulnerability is the increased possibility of things such as cyberbullying, exploitation, and emotional distress. The success side, also, we have new forms of participation and innovation. These can be very important for our youth. We want them to have access to that. At the same time, we would like to minimize the social isolation and harmful digital communities, right? So we have this idea here that while we have so many opportunities for information, for creativity, learning, and participation, we also at the same time seem to have greater vulnerabilities like exposure to misinformation, being victimized or exploited, and also feeling socially isolated. Those are two things that seem to happen at the same time. So criminology helps us to understand. Criminology helps us to understand this. So digital risks mirror offline vulnerabilities. Okay, so the same types of risks that youth face in the offline world are also present in the online world. Family, school, and community structures really matter. They're super important, even more than ever. Social controls and support systems have a strong influence on outcomes, and that also criminology provides these strong frameworks for analyzing online behavior. And youth well-being is shaped both by the environment, that is the influence from the outside, and agency, the choices and behaviors that are within the control of the youth themselves. Okay, so two important theories that criminology brings that help us to understand the situation would be the control balance theory. A proponent is Charles Tittle. And so basically behavior is a balance between the control that one has oneself and the control that's imposed on individuals from the outside. And so this idea here, very simply, is that when someone has too much control, they have too much choices of behaviors and things can go wrong. On the other hand, when one has not enough control, they feel constrained and push against that control system. And so this idea of having either too much control, it's like control surpluses, or having too little control, these control deficits, is important for us to understand. And that the digital spaces seem to intensify these control imbalances. And then the other one, which I always love to speak about, Travis Hershey's social control theory, or just we call it control theory. Love this theory. Why? It's because it's the one theory in criminology that asks the question of why do people not engage in crime? Why do they not break the rules, right? Much of criminology is about like, hey, how do we explain why people break the rules, and then how can we combat that? The control theory says that in the case of youth, for example, or anyone, is that youth don't engage in harmful behaviors when they have strong social bonds. Okay, so these social bonds come in 4 types. There's attachment, which is the having caring relationships. Everyone, if you think about someone that you hold close to your heart, maybe your mother or a teacher or someone that was influential on you, think about if you were to break the law, this person would be disappointed. You would feel bad, right? And some people have reported, oh, I was going to do something and then I thought about it and I thought, well, I don't want my mother to have to worry about this, right? Having commitment, some investment towards future goals is important as well. The idea that my behavior now has an impact on what happens to me later. Involvement, engagement in meaningful activities is also important. And then finally, beliefs, shared norms and values. So the digital application of this is that the strong bonds lead to resilience and safe choices for youth in the digital sphere. And the weak bonds lead to drifting, risk-taking, and vulnerability. So I'm going to wrap up very quickly, but say that the youth digital well-being is strengthened by the balance and control environments and social bonds in families and schools that happen both online and offline. The protection of youth comes also through empowering youth with strong digital skills, and then from the environmental side, creating safe, inclusive digital ecosystems as well. And that is the end of my talk. I thank you all for your time and attention.